Shadow on the Mountain. The Story of Hur. Preface. This book, it does not follow the noisy footsteps of those who cleaved the sea with their staffs or descended the mountain with planks of stone. Rather, it follows the almost faded footsteps of those who stood silently at the margins and, through that very silence, became essential. This book does not tell the story of those who spoke to God from the flames, but of those who remained in the shadows, yet were the pillars on which all history rested. Not just witnesses, but silent bearers of responsibility. Not just comrades, but hearts that sustained the struggles of the community when leaders fell into silence, fear, or loneliness. Mary and Joshua. Three names often forgotten in the shadow of Moses, but who each carried, in their own way, the burden of a historical transition. They were not called to perform miracles, but to sustain them, not to lead the people across the sea, but to support the hands of the one who did, not to hear the divine voice from the fire, but to hear its echo in the people. Just three names orbiting Moses. Yet without her, many decisions would not have been made. Without Mary, many wounds would not have been healed. Without Joshua, the promise would not have moved forward. But of all, Hur remains the figure who unites the present with the future, a mentor, a support, a witness to order when everything was sliding toward chaos. He supported Moses' hands in battle, but more than that, he kept the flame of patience alive in moments when the people were ready to crumble. He counseled, forgave, and pushed forward, not by force, but by faithfulness. In him is gathered an entire generation who did not set foot in the Promised Land, but without whom that land would never have been reached. This is a story of patience, of loyalty, of battles fought not in the fields, but in the hearts, of choosing to stay when you could go, of lifting up another when one could ask to be lifted up. It is a story about that courage that does not cry out, but acts. About Mary, who understood suffering. About Joshua, who grew up in the shadow of great men. And about Hur, the one who, without raising his voice, sustained a whole world. I have tried, in the pages of this book, to bring to light what sacred history sometimes leaves in the shadows. The voice of the woman who sang after crossing the sea but was reduced to a single sentence when she made a mistake. The hands that supported a weary body during a fight. The young man who grew up in silence, looking over the shoulders of an old leader and was eventually called to step forward. This is not a theological reconstruction, but a human exploration. Each character is rendered with his shadows and lights, with doubts, questions, loves and losses. Sacred history is preserved, but wrapped in a fabric of inner realism, of unanswered questions and answers that come late, sometimes perhaps too late. For all those who, like her, have supported others without asking for anything in return. They have supported others without being seen. For all those who have lived in the shadows but have always supported the light. This book belongs to you. Chapter 1. Under the Yoke of Egypt. Thick smoke rose slowly above the brick kilns. The smell of baked clay and sweat mingled with the sharp cries of the Egyptian overseers. Under the merciless sun, the bodies of the Hebrew slaves bent and heaved like wind-stomped grass. Hur was pushing with his bare shoulders the heavy yoke of a wooden cart loaded with 2 pieces of wood. Beside him, a young man nearing his teens, one who seemed a stranger to that landscape, Moses was clumsily trying to keep up with him, engaged in a task he did not understand. He was seen by all as the rebel prince, an enigma to many, but to Hur he was Mary's brother. And that was enough. You do not have to try to keep up with me, Moses. You will not find your courage in strength, but in understanding what you are doing, Hur told him, pushing the chariot further. The young man replied between gasps, "But I must learn to live like you, to understand what it means to be a slave, if I ever want to lead you to freedom." Hur paused, and looked at Moses with dusty, time-weary eyes. No true leader dreams of power, but of liberation. The best among us did not choose to put themselves on the front lines. They got there because others could no longer help themselves. That evening, in the modest hut where Hur lived with Mary, the fire flickered outside the open door. Maria sifted flour on a piece of cloth spread out, while Moses massaged the wounds on his hands. "Do you still think you are going to change anything?" Maria asked him, softly and sorrowfully. Moses did not answer immediately. He looked at the fire, where sparks flickered in the air like the hopes of the people. "I do not know if I can, but I feel that God will do something. And I do not want to be far away when that time comes." Hur was silent, then asked, "What if he does not choose you?" Moses looked up at him. His voice trembled, but it was firm. "Then I want at least to be ready to follow the one he will choose." Asterisk. A few months later, as the sun set within the city walls, young Moses fled Egypt. Behind him was a dead Egyptian, an even more oppressed people, and his sister, Mary, weeping, misunderstood and troubled. Hur, in silence, placed a thick cloak on Mary's shoulders, whispering to her, "Do not judge him. He did not know how to fight otherwise. The blood on his hands is not a condemnation, but a new beginning." "But what if he does not come back?" she whispered, wringing her hands. "Then God will choose someone else." "But if he came back, our world would not be the same." Years passed, and Hur remained in Egypt, helping his fellow men, performing small but constant deeds, teaching the young to walk uprightly and raising up the fallen. He carried neither staff nor cloak, but he carried with him a kind of authority that came not from royal blood, but from the suffering shared by those around him. And one day, when Moses returned with burning eyes, slow speech, and the name of the one who is, Mary fell silent, and Hur looked at him again with hope. "You have returned." Moses nodded, not as a prince, but as a slave. Hur ran a hand over his beard and smiled. "Then you are ready to be a leader." The night of blood and silence. The tent smelled of roast lamb, burnt straw, and silence. An unusual silence. It was not sleep, nor peace after work. It was a long, heavy, dense silence, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Maria was kneeling near the threshold of the tent. She had tightened her shawl around her shoulders, although it was not cold. On the doorpost of the tent, Hur had just smeared the blood of the lamb he had sacrificed, as Moses had commanded. His hands were still dirty. He stood there, watching the flickering flashlights in the distance. Mary could not sleep, nor could she cry. It was a night when all the people had to remember who she was. She had long forgotten who she was. "Did you put blood on the threshold?" she asked, without looking at him. "Yes," Hur answered. What if it was just a figment of her imagination? What if Moses was just blinded by grief and desire for justice? Hur did not answer her immediately. He walked over and sat down beside her, touching his back to the hurtain. "I do not put blood because Moses told me to. I put it because, finally, I know that we can no longer save ourselves. Neither I, nor you. But he is my brother, Hur. I watched him grow up, dried his wounds, and then he left. And now he comes and talks about a God who made me suffer for 40 years. Now, am I to believe that tonight the angel of death will pass through town and spare only those who have blood on the door? If he does not spare us, then we will all die. Then at least we will die trying to believe. But what if it is true, and you did not anoint the door?" Maria closed her eyes. From under her thick lashes, hot tears fell on the clay floor. "I do not want to believe out of fear, Hur. I want to believe out of truth. But sometimes truth comes only after taking the first step in fear. I have prayed for so many years, and heaven has been silent. he said almost in a whisper. And now, after all this time, it chooses a wounded, fugitive, stammering man to speak in his name? Hur reached out his hand and lightly touched her shoulder. Precisely because he is wounded, Mary. Precisely because he is weak. God does not need strong arms, but hearts that know they are small. Perhaps Moses was not chosen because of who he was, but because he was broken. Mary looked at him for the first time that night. Her eyes sought refuge, but also an explanation, something that neither her prophecies, nor her rituals, nor her sisterhood had given her. And what am I? Hur. Am I just the sister of Moses? Am I just a woman in the midst of others' pain? You are the voice that will sing when others fall. You are the one who will tell people when and how to cry, and how to believe again. You were born for the desert, for suffering, not for life in a palace. Maria stood up. She wiped her face. With trembling hand, she touched the blood-stained threshold and bowed in silence. Then, with his back still straight, but his soul broken and healed at the same time, he said, "If it is the night of judgment, then so be it. But if it is the night of the beginning, then I want to sing when the dawn rises." And from afar, in the middle of the night, the first cry was heard from Egypt. But in the tent of Hur and Mary's, silence reigned. The silence in which faith grows without too much noise. Hur's last memories of Egypt were not of Moses before Pharaoh, but of the night when the blood of the sacrificed lamb flowed over the thresholds. They sat in their tent. Hur held Mary's hand, as they heard screams in the night, then silence, and then a new sound, one they had never heard before, deliverance. Mary whispered into the darkness, "It will cost us everything we are, and everything we no longer want to be," Hur replied. The next day, when they left Egypt, with Moses in the lead, Mary sang. Hur could not sing. She was pushing a heavy cart full of planks, nails, and ropes, but in her heart a silent melody was being born. Chapter 2. The Carpenter. The sun burned slowly over the valley where the tribes of Israel had pitched their tents. The desert air grew thicker at midday, when even the wind seemed tired of blowing through the rocky hills. A smell of burnt resin, sand, and freshly cut wood hovered in the air. Amidst a neat area of tents, the rhythmic sound of chisel and hammer came from a corner shaded by a tarp's harpstel for acacia poles. Hur wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, dipped his fingers in the water of an earthenware pot, and returned to his work. With almost solemn patience, he was sanding the top of a potholder, an order from one of the Levites. The wood smelt of fresh resin, even though it had been cut weeks earlier. Each fiber flowed like a story, and Hur had a gift for listening to them. He was not a man who talked much, nor did he need to. The camp residents had learned that if they had a family problem, difficult advice, or a question about God, Hur knew how to listen. He did not always give perfect answers, but what he said carried weight, because he rarely and never spoke in vain. A few steps away, his wife Maria was embroidering a thin linen cloth lying on a low mat. She raised her eyes and looked at him, smiling slightly, but without interrupting the thread of her work. "Is that wood talking to you again?" she asked jokingly. Without raising her head, Hur smiled briefly, without stopping smoothing. "Maybe, but just say what he has to say, not what I want to hear," he replied. Maria nodded. She knew him all too well. Although he looked like a simple carpenter, in him was the strength of a mountain and the calm of a deep lake. When the people came out of Egypt, Moses stood as a great leader, Aaron as a mighty voice. But Hur was the bridge, the structure behind every action. Without him, many things would have collapsed along the way, even if he had not been appointed to lead the tribes. Not everyone knew that he was Mary's husband. Most knew him only as the master carpenter. or he who has eyes of fire and a voice of polished stone. Hur also did not want to be recognized for anything else. Just as he was checking the alignment of his piece, a boy of about 10 years old came running in, his step erratic and his cheeks red from the sun. "Hur, father said you must come to the meeting with the elders. News has come of the Amalekites." The man put down his chisel and hammer and stood up slowly, drying his hands on a piece of thick cloth. He looked at Mary. Their look was brief but intense. "Go," he said simply. "You were more prepared for this than you think." Hur said nothing. There was already an answer in his silence. As he made his way to the center of the camp, he remembered Egypt. The whips he had seen breaking the men's backs, the night when the lamb had been sacrificed and blood smeared the doors, his mothers trembling, as they hurriedly gathered their belongings. He had not understood then. Now he was beginning to understand. Every man who comes out of slavery must become something else, a support, a pillar, a man who supports others. He knew that hard times would come. He knew he would not be at the head of the army, nor would he lift the staff like Moses, but he will be there, where strong arms and quiet hearts will be needed. And if he has to hold one hand up until the sun goes down, then he will. The gaze of the young. The sun beat down on the whole valley, where the people of Israel lay like a scattered swarm. Newly pitched tents, children's cries, women needing flour, men trying to build some order in all the chaos. They were not yet a free people. They were an uprooted people. Hur walked slowly between the rows of tents, looking for wood to build a platform, a place from which Moses could speak. He passed a group of young men arguing happily. Then his gaze lingered on one who was not joking with them, a boy of about 17, with broad shoulders and eyes too serious for his age. She knew him. "Joshua, son of Nun." "Yes, yes, Mr. Hur." "I am not sir, just Hur. Why are not you with the others?" Joshua ran a hand over his dusty forehead. "I do not want to get used to the silence. I do not believe it. This is what Egypt looked like before the scourge came. Silence, then sorrow." Hur looked at him with a mixture of wonder and respect. It was not a childish observation. "What do you think is coming?" "I do not know, but people are still afraid. Some are still crying over pots in Egypt. Our mothers taught us to be quiet when the Egyptians passed by. Now we are asked to sing. It is difficult. How about you? What does your heart tell you?" Joshua looked up. They were the eyes of someone who had never asked to be seen. "Because if God is with Moses, I want to be near him, to learn, to not be conditioned by fear." Hur sighed. He remembered Moses' words from his youth. They were almost identical. Some souls carried the same fire, only many years apart. "Then come, help me with this platform. It is a small beginning, but this is how big responsibilities begin." Joshua lifted a beam without complaint, and without asking where it would be erected. Later, Mary watched them both from the shadows as they lifted poles and tied them with ropes. When Hur approached their water tent, she asked, "Who is the boy?" "Joshua. Maybe the future. But for now, he is just a young man who is learning to listen without asking for a front seat. So let us keep him close. The people will need leaders who have learned to be silent before they speak." Hur smiled, but did not respond. He thought the boy would go far, but first he would walk a long way. With the people, with the dust, with the doubt, with the dream, and maybe, one day, he would lead. But today, he will take only a piece of wood, with his eyes fixed on Moses, and his heart set on something greater. Shadows in the soul of the young. The nights in the desert had a special sound. The wind whistling through the tents, the sand rustling under the footsteps of a hurried passerby, the irregular snoring of dogs, the sighing of children in their sleep. But for Joshua, the night never brought peace, only many questions. He was alone, on a rock, with a spear resting on his knee. He held it tight, as if something invisible was hiding behind the dark dunes. You do not know if you carry it to fight or to feel brave, do you? Hur's voice made him wince. The old man approached slowly, with a thick cloak over his shoulders and a small jug in his hand. What are you doing here? Joshua. I am standing guard. To whom? To everyone. To no one. I do not know. Hur sat down next to him, sighing. He handed him the jug. Water. It does not banish doubt, but it shuts him up a little. Joshua drank in silence. Then, without warning, the words came out, heavy, as if he were holding back a storm. Hur, I do not understand why Moses trusts me. I am only the son of Nun. I am not a scribe. I do not have visions. I cannot talk like Aaron or listen like you. I just fight. That is all I know how to do. Hur did not answer right away. He looked at the embers in the distance, where some elders were roasting quail. When I was your age, I wanted to be a sculptor, a builder of temples, to leave behind me altars and columns. But God did not give me stone. He gave me wood, and a stubborn people, and a prophetess. And did you find your place? Hur smiled bitterly. No, I received it. When Moses returned from the desert, and no one believed him, I was one of the few who did not ask him anything. I looked at him and understood. Not because I understood him, but because I saw him crying lone in the night. Joshua looked at him for a long time. I, too, cry sometimes. But on the inside, I do not know if it is weakness or just something I should hide. Hur sighed and looked at the sky. True weakness is not feeling something. It is never asking what to do with what you feel. Joshua, for the first time, put down his spear. He set it down beside the stone and leaned forward slightly, like a child demanding a simple answer. And what should I do with this fear of not being good enough? Hur did not answer him directly. He took from his bag a small wooden hammer, worn with old traces of resin. This taught me a lot. It does not hurt much, but it cannot make a table out of a tree trunk either. It is a tool for small things. But sometimes the nail that holds a gate is hammered in with it. He stood up, leaving the hammer beside Joshua. You might not be like Moses, but perhaps one day Moses could not have gone on without you. And he walked away, leaving him alone under the silent sky. Joshua touched the hammer. He could still feel the imprint of Hur's hand on the handle. And for the first time in the great desert, the young soldier felt that he did not have to have all the answers. He just had to be there. Chapter 3. When hands get tired. The desert wind was sharper at dawn. When Joshua came down from his tents, the sky had the color of wet stone, the promise of a not-too-mild day. Round him, men gathered with spears and slingshots. The Amalekites were moving nearby. The danger was no longer just a shadow. It was very close. Moses, tired, was standing by a crooked tree. With staff in hand, he looked more like a pillar than a man. Hur and Aaron flanked him, and beside them, Joshua, armed but with the eyes of a child who had not yet forgotten the silence of the night. Joshua, said Moses, looking into his eyes, you lead the battle today. Choose worthy men and lead them into the valley. I will be on the hill, with the staff of God in my hand. Joshua bowed his head. Wordlessly, Moses briefly squeezed his shoulder. You will never be alone. The valley was a chaos of footsteps, blood and dust. The Amalekites were striking with implacable hatred. Joshua shouted orders, sometimes in a hoarse voice, sometimes only in gestures. The people followed him as a true leader, not because they were afraid of him, but because he always fought in front of them, not behind. But by noon, the pace of the war had changed. Victory seemed to be faltering. Every time Joshua looked toward the mountain, he saw a change. When Moses raised his arms, the people had the upper hand. When he fell, Amalek advanced. Hur, who was at Moses' side, saw the tremor in Moses' elbows, saw the staff slip. He said something to Aaron. It did not take many words. They found a stone and placed Moses on it. Then Hur, with his strong carpenter's hands, raised his right arm and Aaron his left. They said nothing. They just stood there, holding up Moses' hands. The wind blew on their cloaks, on their faces, on the sacred staff. Down in the valley, Joshua felt the dark veil lift. Toward evening, the battle was won. The Amalekites had fled. In the camp, the people sang. But Joshua did not join in the singing. He went up the mountain. At the top of the mountain, Moses was pale, exhausted. Aaron, red-eyed, exhausted. But Hur's hands were tired, but his eyes were clear. Joshua approached. "Was it the stick?" he asked. Hur smiled faintly. It was obedience. It was loyalty. It was God. Joshua remained silent. He looked at the staff, then at Moses, then at Hur. I could not do it without you." Hur leaned toward him and said softly, "And someday the others will not be able to make it without you either." Then she gently laid a hand on his shoulder. The weight of that gesture was stronger than any sword. Later, Moses wrote on a scroll, "The Lord was our banner. Remember this to the children of Israel, and write the name of Joshua." But Hur remained behind the curtains, his skin tanned and his palms silent, always ready to support. An invisible pillar, a supporting column, a mentor who did not need to be mentioned because he had already laid the foundation. Chapter 4. The Line of Truth. The day had started with a bang. In the quiet valley of the camp, two tribes had argued, Reuben and Simeon. A lost animal, a broken promise, an insult thrown between two young men. In an instant, the scandal had grown and several men were already pushing each other with their hands on their swords. Joshua came running, determined, erect, with a sure step. The people made way for him. "What is happening here?" "They robbed us," one shouted. "They are lying. The goat is ours. They broke the rules of the tent. They spat on our son," he shouted. Anger boiled over. Joshua raised his hand. "Silence! Bring the two young men here." Now, they were led in, trembling. One had dried blood on his cheek. Another was crying, but he stubbornly held his chin up. Joshua looked at them, then at their fathers, then at the people. And then he felt the power. The people waited. His word mattered. In a single sentence, he could condemn or forgive. He could impose his authority, show who was in charge. His voice rose instinctively, harshly. "You have brought shame to the camp. You have let blood flow between brothers. Moses taught us the law, and you trample on it, each according to his right, each according to his sword." The people murmured. They seemed satisfied. Righteous, they awaited punishment. Joshua raised his staff to speak again. But then he saw Hur. He was standing a little further back, silent. He held only a small wooden object in his hand, the hammer. Joshua blinked. A thought crossed his mind. The truth is not what you think is right. It must be extracted with patience, not with a hand shaking with anger. He lowered the staff. Puppet, down, and took a deep breath. What was taken, let it be returned. What was said in hatred, let it be taken back with humility. And you two will eat from the same plate today, in the same tent. If you do not know how to forgive, you have no place among the people called by God. He turned. He walked away without looking back. Later, at the edge of the camp, Joshua sat down next to Hur. The fire was small. The hammer was there, between them. "I almost spoke too fast," Joshua said. "All right," Hur said. "You raised the stick, but you also lowered it. It is harder than it seems. Joshua remained silent. He looked at the sky, at the stars. How do you know when it is best to forgive? Hur smiled, looking at the embers. When it is easiest for you to strike, then you must seek forgiveness. That evening, in the tent of the two young men, laughter could be heard, uncertain, but sincere. There were also tears, there were also apologies, but also the story of a chief who knew when to put down his stick, and of an old man with a small wooden mallet who did not give orders, but gave precise directions with his silence. Chapter 5. The Shadow of Gold. The days had become indefinite. The sun rose and set on a people who no longer counted time by the stars or the Sabbath, but by the absence of Moses. Almost 40 days, someone whispered. He was swallowed up by the mountain, said another. God has abandoned us. Joshua had gone up with Moses to a place of passage, but then he had remained waiting, alone in a curtain of rocks, on the edge of Sinai. He had not gone up higher, but he had not come down either. There he spent his days. He fasted, he waited, he struggled with many thoughts. Down in the valley, songs resounded. Not psalms, only strange rhythms, sounds of metal, and so much laughter. One evening, Joshua heard clearly a bell ringing and a cry, "Feast to our God." He frowned. He no longer understood anything. He went down, not in the camp, but up close, hidden among the rocks. What he saw made him stop. An altar, a golden calf, erected on a platform, dancing, women with bare arms, fires, children, throwing flowers, men singing around a foreign god. And in the midst of them, Aaron. Joshua felt something break inside him. He let go of Moses. He should have been the one watching. And now, he flinched angrily, but a hand pulled him back. It was Hur. He was standing at the edge of the camp. He had not come in. "Are you letting them do this?" Joshua shouted. Hur looked down. "They pushed me aside. When I said it was not okay, they spat on me. They hit my hands. I chose to live in silence rather than die talking, so I could be here when everything falls apart. But Aaron was afraid. And when the leader is afraid, the people invent another god." Joshua turned, trembling. "I am going to find Moses." "No, you will wait for him. He will come. But in the meantime, learn what you must never forget. People without patience become slaves to their own fear." 3 days later, Moses came down with the tablets of the law. Joshua told him what he had seen. His voice was hoarse. Moses wept and broke the tablets in front of all the people. Screams, collapse, the gold melted. The idol was scattered in ashes. But in Joshua's soul, a question remained. Where is the boundary between faith and blindness? Between loyalty and saying nothing? Editor. That night, Joshua did not sleep. Hur came and sat down beside him. "You told me that silence saved you. It was a choice. I wanted to scream, to destroy the altar, but I did not know what was right." Hur remained silent. Then he said, "I did not know either. But sometimes God leaves us in the darkness, not so we can see, but so we can learn to listen differently." Joshua looked at him for a long time. "What if next time I do not remain silent?" Hur smiled faintly. "Then you will be ready to lead them." Chapter 6. The Shadow Between Us. At the edge of the camp, between the tents of the Levites and a group of dried figs, Mary had gathered the clay pots that had been overturned during the storm. She moved quickly, but with abrupt movements, not out of haste, but out of silent anger. It had not been the same since Moses had come down, his face burned by the glory of the mountain. The people were silent in shame. Aaron avoided their gaze, but Hur stood like a silent wall, as if nothing had happened. Mary saw him coming. He had just brought some planks to repair a tent. He was covered in dust, his gray hair disheveled, like raw flax, his gaze calm as ever. "Do you have a few minutes?" she asked, without looking at him. "For you, always," she sighed. She was not in the mood for courtesy. You were silent, and the people were dancing around a god thrown into the fire. Hur did not defend himself. He simply rested his hands on a low tent pole. "I said what I had to say, but they chose something else. And then what did you do? You stood aside like a stone. Neither Moses nor Joshua. But you, I thought differently." He looked up at her. There was much compassion in his eyes. "I was not called to lead, only to support. Weapons, tents, people. It is what I have done all my life." Maria approached. For the first time, her voice trembled. "And me? Have you ever supported me, too?" Hur gasped. The question had nothing to do with the calf, nor with the camp. It was an old fracture, now brought to light. "You loved me in silence. You followed me without words. You lost me without fighting. For years, I spoke for both of us." Started to answer, but she continued. "I lit up. You calmed the fire inside me. I shouted. You wrote on the wood. But when night fell, I fell asleep alone, with Moses on the mountain, and with you hidden in your shadow. Total silence. Only the wind moved the tent cloth." Hur approached. There was only a step between them. "Maria, if I had fought, he would have burned me, and you would have my ashes. I was by your side in all that was invisible, but I do not know if it was enough." She looked at him for a long time. Her eyes softened. "I do not know either." Then she did what she had not done in years. She took his hand. Her palms were cracked, hard. Hers were worn, but still soft. "There is no time for silence. The people are hurt. Moses has changed. And Joshua, he looks at you like a father from whom he expects directions to follow." Hur inclined his head slightly with gratitude and mature love. "Then I will be for him, and if you want, for you too." Maria smiled, turned to leave, but then turned back. "I made you some soup. It is cold, but it is made with my hands." "Like me," Hur said with a faint smile. "Cold, but made with the hands of God." He laughed briefly. Then he went away between the tents, leaving behind a repaired crack. Chapter 7. The Silence of the Afterlife. Part 1. Moses was alone in the tent of meeting. The fire burned faintly. The wood crackled softly. The air smelled of old leather, dust, and incense. He had taken off his sandals, not out of holiness, but out of tiredness. His hands were shaking, not from old age, not from the cold, but from something that even those who had spoken to God could not articulate, the emptiness after the revelation. The touch of divine glory had broken him. When he had come down from the mountain, his face was shining, but inside he was empty, as if the voice of God had burned him inside and left an echo that would not give him peace. "They danced," he said to himself. "When I was with him." He looked at his hands, battered, with traces of dust and old blood, with traces of the tablets of the law that he had held in his hand, that he had broken, that he had cried for. "I have spoken his words to them, and yet they did not endure 40 days. He remembered the face of Hur, motionless, Mary, who did not rebuke him, but did not comfort him either, Aaron, fallen and oppressed by shame, silent before his brother, and Joshua. Oh, yes, Joshua, young, burning with zeal, but still unaware that fire could also consume, not only illuminate. Moses hid his face in his hands. In addition to the voice of God, the silence of the people hurt him, that lack of understanding. In his mind, he saw their faces, hungry for spectacle, but not for truth. "You spoke to me in a flash, Lord, but they need a light rain." He gently opened the skin that covered the parchment with the newly written laws. He touched them with his fingers, as if a wound were healing too quickly. "Why did you choose me?" he whispered. No one answered. Only the wind made the tent canvas tremble. I was just a child growing up in the court of Pharaoh, a fugitive assassin, a stutterer, a man afraid of the people, and you sent me to lead them. But I have not yet taught them to wait for you. Tears, but not of despair, of recognition. At the threshold of the tent, a shadow appeared. Mary, may I? Moses nodded. She came and sat down without saying a word. Between them, the fire, alive. I dreamed of you, she said. You were on the mountain, but you were a child, and you spoke clearly. Moses smiled sadly. Perhaps only in dreams can I be what I have never been. Mary looked at him for a long time. Maybe God was not looking for perfection. Maybe he was looking for a brother who would carry him, even with hesitant steps. Silence. They need you, Moses, not just as a prophet, but as a man who is not afraid to ask why. Moses nodded. For the first time in many days, he felt that his question had been heard, not by heaven, but by someone beside him. That night, while the people slept, and the moon was faintly reflected in the tents, Moses went out. He looked at Sinai. Now he saw it differently. Not as a mountain of fire, but as an ember that burned his masks. And in that moment, he felt that only now, not with his voice, but with his heart, not with his staff, but with his wound. The Silence of the Afterlife, Part 2. When Moses came down from the mountain, his face alight and his shoulders hunched, the people did not immediately recognize him. His splendor was not triumph, but silence, a heavy and profound silence, which could only be borne by those who had ascended to the intimacy of God. That night, in the courtyard of the tent of meeting, Moses and Mary stood facing each other. Between them, the fire flickered. Around them, the silence was not stillness, but waiting. "It will not be long," he said. Mary lowered her gaze. "Do you feel the end is near? I feel someone else's beginning knocking on the door, and he cannot come in until I leave." Mary was not surprised. She knew him. She knew he did not fear death, but she feared that the work would remain unfinished, and above all, that he had not left the right man behind. "You are thinking of Joshua." "Yes, I love him like a son, but he is not ready yet. He is strong, he is loyal, but he does not yet understand that it is not the rod that commands, but the wounds." Mary smiled slightly. Then, in a low voice, she said, "Then leave him with me, and with her." Moses looked at her in surprise. She continued, "I will teach him to listen, not just to commands, but to hearts, to look at a people and hear what is not said in words." And Hur, at the door of the tent, Hur appeared. He had not said anything until then. He simply sat down among them. "I will teach him to be silent, to not confuse action with haste and silence with fear." Moses looked at them both. They had grown old, but not in strength, but in wisdom. "He does not yet know what awaits him," said Moses. "That's precisely why he must learn from us," said Mary. "Not from words, but from our mistakes, from our shadow," added Hur. In the weeks that followed, Joshua spent less time in the camp and more in the surrounding area. Mary took him with her to the tents of the sick, to the women's councils, to the hour of prayer, where no great words were spoken, but the sighs of the tired were collected. "See," she said to him one day, "a leader does not simply move forward. He also goes back, so as not to lose anyone." In the evenings, Hur called him to bring wood, to repair the tents, to teach him the silence of work, to wait for a woman to finish speaking before he answered, to listen to two opposing opinions and not choose one quickly. "Power is when you can command, but choose to lead," Hur said to him, looking deeply at him. "What if they do not listen to me? Then he'd be the first to listen." One night, Moses came to him. Joshua was standing by the fire, alone. Are you listening?" Joshua nodded. "I feel smaller now than I did at first." Moses smiled. "Then you are ready to grow up. When people think they are ready to lead, they are not. But when they begin to fear what it means to be in the lead, only then is it time." He was silent. Then he put a hand on his shoulder. "Mary and her always held my arms. I hold your heart. Do not ever let them out of there." At dawn, Moses went up the mountain again. In the valley, Miriam was preparing jars of oil. Hur was chopping wood, and Joshua, somewhere in the middle of them, watched the fog clear and understood. The leader is not the one who goes ahead, but the one who knows who to leave behind. Chapter 8. Joshua's Justice. The wind blew gently through the tents, and Joshua stopped at the entrance to the great tent of judgment. It was early, but the people had already gathered. Frowning faces, clasped hands, troubled eyes. The people had come to ask for more than justice. They wanted blood. That day, Moses had not gone out. He had remained in the tent of meeting to pray. He had said only this: "It is your turn, Joshua. Listen, investigate, and judge." Joshua thought he was ready. But now, with 3 men before him and a woman on her knees weeping, he realized that nothing had prepared him for the choice between truth and his heart. The case was seemingly simple. A woman from the tribe of Reuben had been caught leaving the tent of an unmarried man in the middle of the night. In a community torn by laws and insecurity, personal sins quickly became the cause of collective ruin. Tradition required expulsion, perhaps even stoning. "We saw it," the witnesses said, "with our eyes, and he did not deny it." Jesu looked at the woman. Her eyes were swollen, not from shame, but from terror. She was wringing her hands and muttering something through her tears. "What are you saying?" Josue asked her gently. It was not disgust. It was not sin. It was just loneliness. There was absolute silence. People murmured. "We cannot lead a people with weakness," someone whispered behind him. "We need determination, purification." Joshua felt that thread of uncertainty between his ribs again. He looked around, looking for Moses' face. He was not there, neither Mary nor Hur. "Give me an hour," he said to the crowd. He retreated into the little tent where it still smelled of fresh parchment. On the table, the tablets of the law, not the stone ones, but the leather ones, carefully transcribed by the Levitical scribes. "You shall not commit adultery. You shall not judge unjustly. You shall love your neighbor." Joshua closed his eyes. "Lord, which is more sacred, to defend the law or to understand its heart?" Hur appeared at the threshold of the tent. Silently, he put down a glass of water. He said nothing. Joshua looked at him, waiting for guidance. "What would you do?" he finally asked. Hur sighed softly. "The truth must be told. But judgment requires pure hearts. Ask yourself, if you were the accused, what would you want from your judge?" When Joshua left the tent, the people were silent. "We have listened to the testimonies. We have listened to the crying. We have examined the law." He looked at the woman. "You were wrong, not because you loved, but because you hid. And yet, God does not punish weakness with death, but corrects it with mercy." Then he turned to the others. "I command the woman to serve for a month in the widow's tent, to help, to teach, to make amends. And you, to welcome her back, like a sister. Not because she has not sinned, but because we'll sin too, every day." The crowd murmured, but no one condemned anymore. Toward evening, Joshua was standing at the edge of the camp. Mary approached him quietly and offered him a piece of bread. She sat down next to him. "It was difficult, yes, but I did not feel alone." "You are not," Joshua smiled. It was the first time he felt not only zeal, but also peace. That night, Moses watched him from afar, from the top of the hill. He did not come down. He said nothing more, but in his heart he knew the boy was learning not to command, but to judge with mercy, and perhaps, one day, to lead without losing his human face. Chapter 9. The Invisible Line. It was barely a day after the trial of the woman of Reuben when the messengers came running. The tents of Ephraim and Manasseh had been moved closer to the southern springs, an area the Levites guarded for purification rites. They have set up stones there, a kind of altar, and they refuse to retreat, an old man said. They are talking about their birthright. Joshua looked up the hill. From there, Moses was watching the camp, but he did not come down. The people waited for a reaction, a response, a command. Hur approached without being called. "It is your time," he said simply. "Should I fight them? No, listen to them, even when they seem unjust. Especially then." Joshua set out with a small band, unarmed, with only his staff in his hand and Hur at his side. At the edge of the disputed area, he found more than 100 armed men. In the center, a makeshift altar of rough stone, hot ash, traces of sacrifices. "What are you doing here?" Joshua asked. A tall, bare-chested man stepped forward. It was Nahor, the leader of a branch of Ephraim. "You judged us in silence, there, among your tents. But we too have a share of the inheritance. You put us on the edge of the camp. You pushed us between the desert and oblivion." Joshua remained calm. "This is a camp, not a kingdom. There are no kings around here. Then why do you speak for Moses?" Hur spoke up, for the first time. Because he taught him to be silent when he could have shouted. Because he had learned to judge when others called for blood. He is not a leader because he was appointed, but because he accepted his mission without asking for a crown. Nahor hesitated. His men murmured. "Joshua," Hur said softly, "give them space." But not out of fear, but out of trust. Joshua turned to Nahor. "I offer you the area by the springs, on one condition: no altar, except at the tent of meeting. If you want to offer a sacrifice, come there, in full view, not in secret. And if we refuse," Joshua did not hesitate, "then choose between keeping the land and keeping the peace. I cannot force love, but I can preserve unity." After a while, Nahor made a sign with his hand. The people began to dismantle the altar. When it was all over, Hur and Joshua walked together in silence toward the camp. The sun was setting, casting long shadows on the tents. "Why did you think they would listen?" Joshua asked. "I did not know if they would listen, but I knew you would speak from an open heart, and truth spoken from the heart is mightier than a sword raised in pride." That night, Moses sent only one sign: his staff, left in front of Joshua's tent. No one said anything, but everyone understood. A leader is not called by the sword, but by the way he guards the connection between people. Chapter 10. Moses' Withdrawal. The wind from Mount Nebo blew hard, and the sky was that pale gold that only twilight could give. Joshua climbed in silence, followed by the rare footsteps of the old man. It was just the two of them. No one else had been called. "Why me?" Joshua finally asked, as the path widened to a panoramic cliff. Moses did not answer immediately. He stopped, looking into the distance, toward the land that stretched to the horizon, the promised Canaan, which he knew he would never reach. "Because you learn not to run when the fire is near. You learn to listen even when the voice is not loud. And you chose to forgive when it was easier to strike." Joshua remained silent. He felt that weight on his stomach that only those called carry. "I cannot be like you, Moses." "You must not," said the old man. "I led the people out of slavery. You will lead them to freedom. Those are two very different burdens. But how can I lead a people who are still afraid, rebelling, and breaking?" Moses turned to him. His eyes were clearer than ever, though his body was shaking slightly. Do not lead them. Walk with them and do not ask them to believe what you believe. But just remember what they have seen: the divided sea, the bread from the sky, the water from the rock, and the God who did not leave, not even when we wanted to escape. When he reached the top, Moses sat down on a rock. He reached out and gave Joshua the old staff, smooth by so many manipulations. I do not give it to you as a symbol of power, but of responsibility. Sometimes the one who carries the staff is the one who trembles the most. Joshua knelt down. What do you need to do, Moses? Moses touched his head lightly with the palm of his hand. Remain human, even when they want to turn you into an idol. Carry their wounds, but do not let them harden your heart. And above all, remember that every step towards the promised land is a journey through the desert. But you are not alone. The sun was slowly setting. Moses remained there, on the rock. He did not ask for tears or songs, only silence. And Joshua understood. Will you return? He asked. No. But I will be there, in the memory of the tabernacle, in the whisper of the law, in the eyes of Hur, and in every difficult choice you will make. On the way back, Joshua went down alone. His steps were heavy, but not out of fear, but because he carried with him a new beginning. Not a triumphal beginning, but a silent one, which had to be demonstrated day after day, walk after walk. At the edge of the camp, Hur was waiting for him. He did not ask for anything. He only offered him a warm loaf of bread, prepared in silence by Mary. Joshua took it, broke a piece and ate it, looking at the mountain, where Moses was no longer, but where he was starting. Chapter 11. The Echo of the Remainers. Mary stared into the embers in the small fireplace beside the tent. She was no longer singing. She had not spoken much for several days. The women looked at her with respect, but also with fear. Mary was not just a prophetess, but a mother of the people, and now it seemed that her silence had foretold something. Hur watched her from the shadows. He had been attentive to the signs, the slow movements, the eyes that avoided his gaze, the prayers uttered without a voice. That evening, when Joshua had come down alone, Mary had not come out to see him. She had remained in the tent, her eyes fixed on the canvas wall. He had not come, she whispered, when Hur entered. He came. It is just that his ascent was also the descent of another, Hur said. Mary folded her arms across her chest. She sighed briefly, almost angrily. He was the thread that held us together. Moses, with his staff, with his gaze that burned sin but comforted the heart. What would we be without him? Hur did not answer immediately. He sat down by the fire, threw down a dry branch, held out his hands to warm himself. We are not without him. We are after him. It is not the same, I know, but it is the only way out. Mary covered her face with her hands. Her voice shook, not from weakness, but from painful sincerity. I am afraid, Hur, not of Canaan, not of hunger. I am afraid of what is breaking inside us, without him. Moses was the part of us that listened to God. Who else will listen now? Hur let the silence run for a long time. Then he slowly approached. He put his hand on her shoulder. Moses may have been our ear, but you are our heart, Mary, and Joshua, our hands. And you? Hur smiled with rare kindness. Me? I am just the one who raises his arms hence when others get tired. Just like I did back then. You know where. Mary laughed softly, a laugh stifled by tears. You were younger then, quieter, but always where you were supposed to be. And I am still there now. Not with Moses, but with you, with the people, with Joshua, when he needs to remember that he must not be alone. Mary looked at the fire. Her gaze was deep, restless, but it was starting to clear. Do you think he will be ready? No, but he will be, just like us. When we left, we did not know we were a people, and yet here we are." In that silence, Mary began to murmur an old psalm. It was not for the others, it was not for the people, it was for herself and for those who had gone. "You who have drawn us out of the bitter waters, do not let us drink from the fountains of oblivion." Hur lowered his head, and in their tent, for the first time in many days, a presence full of hope was felt again, like a torch that burns faintly, but does not go out. Chapter 12. Intersections. The nights had grown colder. The old ashes in the central hearth had been gathered together, a sign that the camp was preparing to move on. But the uneasiness was more and more visible. In the way the children played, in the hasty glances of the leaders, in the heated voices of those demanding answers. A group of men from the tribe of Dan had asked for a meeting with Joshua. They wanted to chart separate paths, more fertile ground, they said. But Hur knew it was about power, the silent rupture between generations, the distrust that grows when the new leader is not entirely the same as the old. That same day, Mary sent a message. She called a prophetic assembly, a rare event, a time when the voices of the elders had to be heard. In the courtyard of the tabernacle, without priests, without sacrifices, only 3 souls sat, Mary, Hur, and Joshua. No one else had been called. "It is falling apart," Mary said, looking at the floor. "The cracks are invisible, but real, and if we do not recognize them, they will tear us apart." Joshua looked up. "I see them. I feel them. But if I pull them, they break. If I let go, they disappear." Hur was silent. Then he asked, "What would you do if you were not Moses?" Joshua looked puzzled. "I am not Moses." "Then do not give them solutions like Moses. Give them something Moses could not. Trust in their responsibility." Mary raised her hand. Her eyes were moist but determined. "I had a vision last night. I saw a large tent, but it was not made of leather. It was made of light, and in the middle of it there was no Moses, nor Aaron, nor you, Joshua, but the people themselves, praying without being prompted, without fear, with a desire to draw closer to God." Joshua understood. "I must call them, to speak, to say what they want, what they fear, what they dream." Hur agreed easily, and to bear their answer as a burden, not as a power. The next day, Joshua called an assembly of the tribes. But he did not give a speech, he did not give orders. He sat down among them and said only this, "Speak, I am listening, not as a judge, but as one who walks with you." An old man began, then a young woman continued. The children said what troubled them, where they were having difficulties, what they felt they had lost, what they did not understand. And that day the people did not let themselves be led. He revealed himself, and he turned to Joshua, not as an authority, but as a mirror of their fears and hopes. After the meeting, Mary whispered to him, "Not even Moses did this. You have opened a new way." And Hur, in silence, placed a stone at the edge of the tent. Let it be a reminder, in case he forgets. That evening, Joshua prayed alone, not to get answers, but to have the patience to listen, and the courage to choose, even when the path did not seem easy. Chapter 13. The Valley of Shadow and the Mountain of Decision. The wind was no longer just carrying sand. It was also carrying cold, that cold of the beginning and the end. Joshua walked among the tents, not looking anyone in the eye. Heli, his younger brother, was dead, the one he had left behind when Moses had chosen him. He had been ill for several months, but no prayer, no oil, no priest had saved him. Joshua did not cry. He could not. He felt empty, perhaps betrayed by God. What was the point of his calling, when life around him was meaninglessly disintegrating? Hur looked for him. He knew where to find him, at the silent spring, at the edge of the camp. He was my brother, Joshua said, without looking back. Not the strongest, not the wisest, but he was what I had not been to him since Moses had chosen me. A simple man, a true brother. Hur sat down next to him. He did not say anything for a while. He only took out a piece of old cloth from his bag, a fringe from Aaron's cloak. Aaron once told me that sometimes we lose people, not because we do not love them enough, but because God does not let them suffer with us anymore. That does not console me, Hur. You do not have to. Just to remind you that life is not about what you lose, but what you do with what is left. Joshua stood up. He looked 10 years older. But in his eyes, a new spark was starting to light. We have to go. The border is near. The people are tired, but also impatient. If I do not give them a direction, they will get lost again. Like at Horeb. Hur looked up at the sky. Then go up. Not with them, with yourself. The mountain ahead is not Canaan. It is our choice. Between continuing, even without Moses, without Aaron, without your brother, or returning to the safety of postponement. Few days later, Joshua gathered the tribal leaders. He simply said to them, I want to go up alone before you, not to fight, not with spies, but to see if we are still ourselves, if we are still worthy of the promise we have received. Mary looked at him in silence, and she gave him a small jar of oil, and said, not to anoint anyone with it, but to pour it, in silence, if you feel that the place is holy. Joshua climbed the difficult and rocky road. No clouds, no pillars of fire, only him, his thoughts, the desire for Eladan, a silent God, but present there too. Having reached the top, he looked at the land that stretched out before him, Canaan, green, alive, as promised, but also full of the unknown. He knelt down, opened the jar, and let the oil flow gently onto the rock. And he said, I do not ask for a sign. I do not ask for a miracle. I only ask for the courage not to run away from what you have asked me to do. When he came down, his face did not shine like Moses's, but his eyes had a deep light, that of a man who had been in the valley of shadows and had managed to come back up. Hur waited for him. He said nothing. He simply touched Joshua's hand and said, Now you are ready, not for conquest, but for service in the midst of risk. Chapter 14. Without words, with eternity, it was dawn. The people were silently gathered at the edge of the valley that led to the borders of Canaan. No celebration, no shouting. Only light footsteps on the sand, long silences and glances filled with what was about to happen. Joshua stood in front, dressed simply. He wore no cloak of authority, no staff, only a rope in his left hand, memories sewn from pieces of tent. Behind him, Maria and Hur walked slowly. They did not need a place in front. They had already accomplished their mission. When they reached the last rock, Joshua stopped. He did not turn his head. He only raised his hand slightly, without great gestures, a sign of thank you without words, of I carried you inside me. Hur looked at him for a long time. He saw him keep his shoulders straight, walk slowly. He understood that the boy of old no longer needed their shadows. You have grown well in our shadow, he said in a low voice, as if to himself. Maria placed a hand on Hur's shoulder, and we emptied ourselves into it. Now we can die without fear. Joshua advanced first, not toward the mountains, but into the open plain before us. Somewhere in the distance we could see the hills of Canaan. But closer were the people, who followed him, not because they were afraid of him, but because they recognized him as someone with authority. Hur sat down on a stone. Mary bent down and picked up a handful of sand. Here ends Moses, he said, and Joshua begins, Hur added, but not because it is new, but because it is the fruit of patience. The sun rose. The shadows of the two old men lengthened. then disappeared between the tents. No one came to see them leave. They did not ask to be seen either. It was a silent departure, but full of presence, like a prayer said without a voice, but which nevertheless reaches where it must. Joshua, in front, did not stop, but in his heart he knew he was not alone. He was the heir of all that had been carefully placed in him, by a brother, by a prophetess, by an old man with a deep heart, and without looking back, he said to himself, "I will take you with me." Until the end. Author's notes on artistic freedoms and the intent of the novel. This novel is a work of fiction, inspired by biblical events and characters, particularly the books of Exodus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Although based on sacred narratives, the text does not claim absolute theological or historical accuracy, but rather pursues a human and narrative exploration of often overlooked figures. Hur's expanded role in the Bible. Hur appears in several key verses as a silent supporter of Moses. In this book, I chose to develop a complex internal portrait, transforming him into a moral mentor, a point of balance between generations, and a character who acts without being asked, precisely because he feels, because he sees the need. It is a literary choice aimed at bringing to light the invisible heroism and strength of those who support from the shadows. The relationship between Hur, Mary, and Moses. The Bible does not specify any relationship between Hur and Mary, but the novel suggests a possible family or spiritual closeness in order to create an emotional tension and a relationship of mutual growth. These connections are not dogmatic, but dramatic. They serve to explore the soul of the transition between generations and visions. The internalization of Joshua, known primarily as a military leader, is also presented here as a young disciple in search of meaning, caught between different models of leadership: the strength of Moses, the silence of Hur, the spirituality of Mary. This reinterpretation adds dimensions of vulnerability, hesitation, and moral formation, absences and filled details. The novel deliberately fills the silences of the biblical text. How does Mary feel when Moses disappears? How does Hur react to the golden calf? What difficulties does Joshua face before becoming a leader? These gaps have been filled by human observation and empathy, not by the claim of authority, but by the desire to open the door to reflection. The final scene and the symbolic silences. The ending is not a triumph, but a silent separation. It is not a victory, but a surrender. I chose this note to reflect the reality of spiritual life. Generations follow one another, calls shift, but the shadow of true holiness remains in those who choose not to see themselves. This novel is not about perfection, but about accompaniment and support, about how, sometimes, the most important people are those who uphold the authority of the leader. If you have read this far, you have taken part not only in a story, but in a quest. Thank you, the author. What do we learn from the lesson on Hur? The lesson about Hur, who supported Moses' hands, is based on an episode in Exodus 17, in which the people of Israel were fighting against the Amalekites. Moses, the spiritual leader of the people, stood on top of a hill with the staff of God in his hands. During the battle, it was observed that as long as Moses' hands were raised, Israel was victorious. When he lowered them, Amalek was victorious. Aaron and Hur came to Moses' aid, supporting his uplifted hands until sunset, thus ensuring victory for the people of Israel. The context of the battle. The importance of supporting a leader. Imagine the scene. Israel, recently freed from captivity, faces a powerful enemy, Amalek. In the midst of this crisis, Moses becomes a symbol of divine leadership. He does not fight on the front lines, but plays a vital spiritual role through prayer and dependence on God. Moses' raised hands symbolized his request for help from God. In this context, we see two important roles. Aaron, Moses' brother, already known as a priest and a man of trust, and Hur, a lesser-known but extremely important character in this episode. What do they have in common? They both see a need and choose to intervene voluntarily. Hur's voluntary action, a lesson in willingness and discernment. The Bible does not say that Moses asked for help. In fact, there is no indication that Aaron and Hur were called to help. This is a powerful lesson. Hur did not wait to be asked, but acted when he saw the need. Hur was attentive to what was happening around him. He noticed Moses' weakness, his tiredness, and he felt responsible to intervene. This is a lesson for us. When we see a need, God calls us to be sensitive and to act without waiting for a clear call or command. Just as Hur and Aaron stood by Moses, we too are called to support our spiritual leaders and work together for the good of the community, especially in times of trial. Hur's attitude, humility, and unnoticed service. Another important aspect is that Hur acted without seeking personal recognition or glory. He is not mentioned elsewhere as a central figure, but this moment shows us that true service often happens behind the scenes, without public praise or recognition. Hur chose to be present and serve, not to be seen, but because he understood that the spiritual battle is as important as the physical battle. With his simple gesture of lifting up Moses' hands, he contributed decisively to the victory. We too can make a huge difference through small gestures that may go unnoticed by people, but are appreciated by God. The power of community and collaboration. We cannot overlook the important lesson about the power of collaboration. Moses, Aaron, and Hur worked together to bring about victory. Neither Moses could have stood alone, nor could Aaron and Hur have led the people to victory without prayer and divine intervention through Moses. Everyone had a role, and every role was essential. This is a powerful picture of unity and service in the body of Christ. We each have different gifts and callings, but when we work together and support one another, we can see great things accomplished through the power of God. No matter how big or small our role, every act of service matters. Hur, an example of a discreet but devoted servant, Hur teaches us that sometimes the greatest contribution we can make is not on the front lines, but in supporting those who are in the foreground. His action is an example for all of us of availability and listening to the needs of those around him. Hur chose to make his hands, his time, and his energy available, without expecting anything in return, but simply because there was a need in that place and at that time. It is an invitation to be sensitive to the needs of those around us and to serve without expecting recognition. When we do so, we contribute to God's work in a profound and effective way. Practical applications. How can we be like Hur? Be attentive to the needs of those around you. Do not wait to be asked for help. Be sensitive to the weaknesses of those around you and offer your support on your own initiative. Serve with humility. Do not seek praise or recognition for what you do. True service comes from a heart dedicated to God and not from the desire to be seen by men. Cooperate with others. God's work is not an individual work, but a collective one. Be ready to cooperate and support those who need help. Conclusion. Hur, a character perhaps unnoticed, but essential, teaches us that sometimes the most important acts of service are those that go unnoticed by many, but are seen by God. Thanks to his availability and his sensitive heart, he became part of a great victory for Israel. In the same way, we are called to participate in God's work through small but significant actions, acting when we see the need, even if no one asks us directly. Be a Hur days, acting with a heart full of love and dedication for God and for our neighbor.